Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. Today I'm joined by John Holmes, who is the chairman of Bernicia, amongst many other things. John is a true champion of the region. He's a proper Mr. Northeast, and he's really passionate about our people, our communities, and the environment that we live in. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him about his journey in many projects and things that will be familiar to lots of people. John, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
Great to be here.
Podcast is called Fear Less, Do More. And the reason for that is because we see ourselves through the podcast as being sort of fearless business champions. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you was because, to me, you're a fearless people champion and also a fearless champion of the region. I mean, you are one of those people who's always out there supporting what people in the region are trying to do for good and what individuals are doing, which is making a difference. Where does that come from?
Thanks for that, Jill. I think it comes from being in or growing up in a community that cared about community and it cared about people. And that was sort of ingrained in me, really. I came to Newcastle when I was 18. I'd only been to Newcastle once previously. So there was that very much sort of tight community, working class background, but very much looked after each other and looked after extended family and friends. So I think it came from that, really, and being really interested in people and coming from a traditional mining background. You know, both my grandfathers were in the mining industry. My father was in manufacturing. Worked very hard. My parents worked incredibly hard. They both had two jobs, you know, and were very giving of their time. I'm the only child, but they were very giving of their family, their extended family, and their community. So typically on a Saturday, it was always about dad fixing cars for people and mum baking for them. You know, I mean, that was a Saturday, really. So there was that very sort of giving attitude and being very interested in people. And their well-being, really.
So it's just ingrained
in you. It probably came
you.
from that,
yeah,
really. And care passionately about the region, really. I love the region, you know, the Northeast. I think it continues to be an exemplar for all sorts of things. That powerhouse has been overused, but it's that real bedrock of innovation, of manufacturing, of everything, you know, for centuries, really, that's driven the nation almost, really. And I think that real sense of revival now, in all sorts of ways, in arts and culture, in sport and all sorts of areas, tourism not least, really, working on that recently. It's just got a huge amount to give nationally and internationally, really.
Yeah, and people talk about the Northeast, like you say, you know, they talk a lot about the past and the innovative past, and they talk about it being a great party place, but then a lot of people will say it's a real hidden gem, and a lot of people from the region will say, well, let's just keep it that way.
Yeah.
What's your view on that? Do you think we should be shouting louder, or is it quite nice to have that isolated pocket to ourselves?
I think it's a balance. I do speak to some people and they say exactly that, you know, don't promote Northumberland too much because it's a beauty in its isolation. So you've got to try and do both. Tourism is now £5.2 billion. You know, it's the fourth biggest employer in the region. So it's important to celebrate that and almost look for opportunities for young people to move into areas of tourism, of arts and culture. But it is about a balance. I think certain areas, not least the Lake District, has probably, you know, tipped the balance, really. And, you know, you've got to be careful, I know that. But I do think we've got a huge amount to offer. It's a very easy region to get around, really. Been doing some work with Visit County Durham recently. And I was saying everywhere is within an hour's drive time, really, you know, and the huge investment that's happening, ongoing investment at Beamish, what's happened at Raby Castle, you know, across the region, in Durham, you know, and it's just amazing asset that we've got. Northumberland as well. And there's areas of Northumberland which are so remote, and you can literally be in valleys by yourself sometimes, really. So it is about that balance. I cycle a lot, as you know, really, and just to be out there and appreciate the region, it's just stunning. I mean, I love cycling with people. I love cycling by myself, and just that sense of isolation. There's no better way to charge your batteries for me, really.
So, you know, as you talked about there, your bedrock has been in a tight-knit community, lots of support, thinking about other people. Has that influenced your career choices along the way?
I think it has. I went to a school in County Durham. I did okay. I didn't do that well at A level. I got a real kick up the backside, really, because I happened to choose a course at what was then Newcastle Polytechnic, and I knew a little bit about it, but probably not that much, if I'm honest. And I was fortunate, it was surveying, and I knew some aspects. It was a very technical course, a very varied course, and it gave me a real insight into the very beginnings of development. And I suppose it gave me an appetite for regeneration. It was the very early stages of the deindustrialization of the Northeast, really. The traditional industry was just starting, to wind down. Obviously, that was a bit of a slow death for some of them in many ways, which was very sad, given my own background. Yeah. But it was starting to look at what else you could use a region for. And obviously, fast-tracking a little bit, that led on to my time with Tineway Development Corporation, look at how you can use vast tracts of industrial land for the greater good, to provide better opportunities for people, better housing. So I suppose it gave me that real appetite. As I say, Newcastle was a bit of an unknown leap for me, really. But it was a fabulous course. It was a really good course. It was what they then called a thick sandwich course. So I did my third year in industry, working for an international firm of surveyors and project managers. So it was a very varied course. I met my wife at school, and she graduated the same year as me, and we married the same year, really. So we had a real connection with Newcastle in the Northeast. So always really enjoyed what the region's got to offer, really appreciated how it's changed, and how we can all enjoy it. But it's almost that feeling of respecting the past, celebrating the past, but then investing in the future and looking at future opportunities, new industries, new innovation. And again, we've got fantastic universities and colleges in the Northeast that are working, thankfully, a lot closer together in terms of innovation, all the STEM subjects, everything that's happening. Some really exciting stuff coming out of the FE colleges that I've been involved with. So great opportunities for young people to go slightly different routes as well, not always to go the university route, to go the vocational course. And I just find all of that really exciting, to not go the traditional route. And chatting to people who haven't gone the traditional route really interests me as well.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming increasingly common, and certainly from my profession, it's opening up to different people that wouldn't have had the opportunity because there are now different routes that you can take to get into the profession that don't necessarily have to involve universities. And I think that's the same across the board. It's unlocking opportunities for people that wouldn't have had them otherwise through apprenticeships and all of those sorts of things. So you did a surveying degree
and then became a chartered surveyor.
You became a chartered surveyor.
Yeah.
So your interest in regeneration, was that the reason why you thought, I'm going to go into this and this is what I want to do?
It's interesting because I qualified, became a chartered surveyor, and I was just chatting to someone a couple of weeks ago when I did my year out. It was only a couple of years prior to that you wouldn't have any chance, coming from my background, to move into being a chartered surveyor because you had to pay to be articled. You didn't get salaried. You actually paid for the benefit of working, really. So unless you had a fairly affluent background, and parents, you had no chance of going into a profession like that, really. So that's a cultural change as well. I did become a chartered surveyor, and I was very happy working in the region, but then worked down at Drax Power Station. I was project manager for Drax B when they were building Drax B.
Right.
And that was great, worked for a big company of surveyors. And then we moved back to I lost my father, very early, sadly, and we moved back to the Northeast. And I was working again within a chartered surveying environment. Then there was a bit of a sliding door moment for me because the managing partner called me one day and he said, I'm putting you up for an opportunity in central government. And that was when Michael Heseltine, as Secretary of State, was trying to get the private sector to be seconded to work alongside the civil service on regeneration projects. And I said, really? Are you sure? Really? And he said, yeah, you're in London in the next couple of days to have an interview. And one thing led to another, and I found myself being seconded to what was then the Department of the Environment. And it was a real game changer for me.
Yeah.
It was an eye-opener working in the civil service, which I'd never done before, being in the heart of Whitehall when things were really changing on regeneration. The early stages of setting up development corporations, so London, Docklands and Merseyside had happened, and they were starting to think about Tyne and Wear, Teesside, other development corporations. And I worked on some fantastic projects, big regeneration schemes, and I did that for 2 years. So I was never going to go back to be a traditional surveyor after that excitement, and I got a real appetite for regeneration. So it was a fairly natural follow-on to join Alistair Balls, who was Chief Executive of Tyne and Wear Development Corporation. And I had 8 fabulous years, really, working on predominantly Royal Quays. That I was project director, but also Newcastle Quayside, the International Centre for Life, doing the feasibility and the funding for that. Great project, celebrates its 25th anniversary next year. So lots of brilliant projects, some tough projects, and really challenging schemes, not least because we were seen as a bit of a conservative vehicle being parachuted into Labour-controlled areas.
Yeah.
And we had direct powers from Westminster and budgets. So it didn't go down too well in the early days. It took a lot of convincing local people that there was something in it for them.
Yeah.
And we weren't just going to do yuppie flats with marinas, which London Docklands had a bit of a name for at the time. So it was convincing people that we really were going to regenerate in every sense, and that's the physical, the social, and the economic aspects. And I think for me, that's the only way it could be successful and sustainable.
Yeah, a holistic approach where you're not just thinking about what can we build or what can we knock down.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about how does that impact on the community? How does that bring society
and change
together?
People's
how
lives,
does it change
really,
people's lives? Yeah. I mean, Newcastle, you talk about the quayside there, is unrecognisable from the time that you're talking about. And I think, sometimes it's only with hindsight that you can see, actually, that was the impact that made.
Yeah.
But, going down to work in Whitehall, I mean, Michael Heseltine had a bit of a ferocious reputation at the time. He's probably one of the best known characters from that era. Did you work directly with him?
Indirectly, I mean, the minister that oversaw our work was David Trippier, who was MP, Inner Cities Minister, and he was MP for Blackburn. Yeah. But we did see Heseltine in terms of, I think he had a vision. I think he was a visionary. So yes, we did see quite a lot of Hesa, as he was then, but mainly David Trippier and a couple of other ministers at the time. So it was a really eye-opener for me, and to be involved in the very early stages, I feel was a great privilege.
I think the civil service always interests me because you have to be apolitical when you work in the civil service, because you may one day be working for a government with one colour and then the next day it changes to someone else. How do you balance that out with your own sort of political views, whatever they may be, if you're working for the opposition, so to speak?
It's tricky, and I was doing just that at the time. But you've got to try and look at, I suppose, things for the greater good, really. Yeah. How could you use this? I suppose the DNA is always trying to benefit communities, benefit people. And I think, again, just to fast track a little bit, levelling up's been used a lot and then dropped, by the current administration. And I think, levelling up was a bit of a slogan which never really got going for me. Yes, it needed levelling up, but the money was never there to support true levelling up for me. And that's about regional equality. And that's what I'll always fight for, and try and get the North East to get a bigger share of the cake, really. I'm very excited by our elected mayor. I think Kim McGuinness is doing a brilliant job. It's a good start, but I think we need to really support the regional governance to get the local authorities to work collaboratively together. And I think that's what cuts across your personal politics. It's got to as well, really, to see that for the greater good. So
I presume that you're a big fan of devolution.
I am.
Yeah. And would you like to see devolution go further?
I would, but I think this is a good start.
Yeah.
And I think to look at how you can have a regional economic strategy, which is what I did work on when I was at One North East, the RDA. So at least they had a regional approach. They had a regional economic strategy, a regional spatial strategy, regional tourism. The region worked well together. At that time, we were able to access significant amount of European grants. So again, sadly, we haven't got that now, but you were able to lobby and work effectively together. And I think it's an opportunity to do that now. And I think the private sector are recognizing that there's a real opportunity to get behind the public sector that's had a tough time and being severely underinvested in all sorts of ways, for a couple of decades now, to really change that. And, there's huge challenges, obviously post-Brexit, energy, world wars, all the rest of it really. But I think to use the region in a more effective way. We, in my role at Bernicia, we helped set up the North East Housing Partnership recently, and that's just about getting the housing associations and the local authorities to work smarter together and more collaboratively.
Yeah. So if you were appointed mayor, where would you start? Because it is hugely challenging. There's so much that needs to be done. Where would you start? I
think to communicate to all sorts of levels and all sorts of forums, and this is what Kim is very good at. I think she's again a real people person. She's a real front of camera person, and I think she's able to, given her own background, to relate to people extremely well. But I think the key is to demonstrate to people, whether that's the private sector, whether that's the local authority infrastructure, or whether that's people on the street and young people, that there is something worth fighting for in the North East. And just to try and say she couldn't possibly do everything, no human being could, but to say she's going to focus on skills, on opportunities, on the economy, on transport, to be very specific. Yes, there will be hopefully some quick wins, the Northumberland line, various other things, upgrading the metro. I think we're fortunate from that point of view. We've got the bedrock of good infrastructure, but it needs, bringing the buses all under one roof and to work better together, really. Smart cards, all those sorts of things which we've seen I was in Manchester last weekend, it works superbly well. And I think there's a great chance for the mayors to work, the 7 or 8 of them to work together, to share experiences.
Just popping in to say, if you are enjoying the conversation so far and want to make sure you keep up to date with other episodes, then please hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. Let's jump back into the conversation now. You mentioned earlier that when you've been involved in regeneration, sort of at the coal face, that it can be quite challenging to get projects over the line. Can you tell me a little bit about that, about some of the challenges that you faced in getting some of these big, high-profile projects over the line, and how you approached that? Yeah,
sure. Just walking along the quayside in the bright sunshine this morning was really nice. And I was just reflecting when that was being assembled, the land assembly was being done, it was really tough because that area between where we're sitting here in the Ousburn to the Tyne Bridge was in over 50 land ownerships.
Wow.
And that was one of the biggest challenges, to start to pull all of that together and say, how can we assemble the land? And we did, I think, a pretty good job, but it was a real hard job to do. We had CPO powers, we had planning powers, but even with that, it was really difficult because you always get people. I think we got down to about the last 2, and they inevitably were crucial bits of land which we needed for the master plan to work properly together. And, people hang on in there for, a big bag of gold, really, so, and that takes time. You've got to go through CPO processes and other legal, more than anyone, the legal processes are very challenging. And all the time you're trying to sort of still say to people, there is a master plan, we were around for 11 years. It wasn't quite long enough, could have done with another 5 years, ideally, really. Royal Quays had other challenges. The land ownership was simpler. It was mainly owned by the Port of Tyne, but it was a heavily contaminated site.
Yeah.
There was 4 mine shafts on the site. There was a former sawmill with lots of contamination, a crumbling dock edge, and a sloping site, really, just for starters. And then we were just starting to put the infrastructure in and trying to get the private sector interested, and Meadowell disturbances happened across the road. So that knocked the confidence to get the private sector involved. The other thing which I think was interesting, the government of the day drew a red line around our boundary. And the message from Westminster was very much work within your red line and trickle down will happen, i.e. benefits from local communities will happen in due course. And that was never going to happen. And I never believed in that, really. What we had to do was to get into the local communities and set up monitoring panels and liaison panels and consultations and all sorts of things to explain to people what we were doing and to understand and empathise with their challenges. There were some tough estates, second, third generation unemployment, real deprivation, a lot of voids in the housing, awful conditions. And not surprisingly, people were being resentful about, what they perceived as big glitzy buildings the other side of the fence.
Yeah.
So you could only do it by getting in and working with local communities and saying there is going to be something for you. And that's working on employment, on education, on prioritising opportunities for them. I think it probably flexed and bent the rules in terms of European procurement, but we were saying it's got to work for local people.
Yeah.
You've got to improve the life chances of local people. So we had an education centre on the site, which was great. And in all of our contracts, contractors and developers had to be committed to providing opportunities as part of the education centre. It was a great success. It won national awards. We had an arts project, so it got local people, particularly women, on creative writing and working with international artists on all sorts of really emotive to say, this is how we are, this is how tough it is, and how you can communicate that in through the written word really was really powerful. But then the hard sell of creating jobs. And a lot of those people had been completely de-skilled. So it was trying at a fairly basic level sometimes to improve literacy and to get people in a position where they could pitch for work. And again, that was written into our contracts that they had to prioritise local people. So some tough challenges, but it was a fabulous job to work on. And we had a commitment to 25% social housing that we stuck to rigidly. We had some good developers, local developers, that bought into it. And then providing high quality infrastructure, which thankfully I cycle down there quite often. It's very well looked after. Yeah. And you've got that very high quality public realm, which has now got a ferry terminal and a marina. Yes, it's got a marina, but it's got all sorts of other things for local people as well.
You mentioned there social housing, and you've been involved with Bernicia now for
7 years.
7 years, yeah.
Yeah, it's been great.
Did you always have an interest in social housing, or was that just an opportunity that came along and when you looked at it thought, actually, that would fit with my values and things that are important to me?
I think I did, again, going back to my own background, and interesting, I've been listening a lot to George Clark, who I greatly respect, really, and again, he talks about growing up in Washington, and, he used to walk 15 minutes to school and never crossed a main road, and he lived in a council house, and he said it was 10-year blind. You couldn't see what was council housing, what was private housing. And that's the sort of environment I grew up in, I suppose. People didn't care particularly, what sort of housing you grew up in. And that was my family background, really. So I suppose it's always been important that people get the best life chances. And again, I think the whole approach to social housing and rented housing is very different in this country compared to France and Germany and Holland particularly, really, where they are really innovative. So I suppose it's always been important. Again, going to development, I worked on social housing right from the very beginning of my career for what was then North British Housing. It's now called Places for People. So we always worked for housing associations in many ways, converting Tyneside flats and other things. Yeah. So they were major clients of ours really right through my career. Development Corporation had a real strong commitment to social housing, not just on Royal Quays, but on all of our developments. And that was just getting local people engaged really and giving them life chances. So, and my first meeting with what is now Bernicia was actually on Royal Quays. They were developers just across the road. So I've known the organisation for a long time. It's always been very, very important to me. We've got some major challenges. This government has set out they're going to build 1.5 million houses over the next 5 years. It's going to be a massive challenge to maintain quality so we just don't replicate the mistakes of the past. Yeah. And build, poor quality housing that the slums of the future almost. We're wanting to maintain the quality of the housing and the energy ratings and other things so we don't fall into the trap of, awful houses with mold and all sorts of other poor quality. So we're wanting to maintain the standards. We as an organisation are very selective where we build. We want to build the right properties, good quality in the right places for the right reasons, really. So we're quite clear about that. But there are some going to be major challenges ahead for the public and the private sector. We're a heavily regulated sector, which I've got no problem with at all, to improve standards. I think that needs to be a bit more consistent in the private sector as well, which this government starting to address. But people, have a human right almost to have a good quality home. And I think that's very important. So social housing is very important. But it's interesting because, yes, I've been involved for 7 years. The nature of our business, and we are a business, I was slightly taken to task in one of my first meetings that I said we are a business that makes a profit. And we are. We employ 600 plus people in the region. We have a turnover of getting on for £90 million, really. We are a major contributor to the regional economy. And we are business-like, business-focused. We've got to be. But it's just how that is translated across the region. And we have a commercial group of companies as well that make a profit. We decided sort of 5-ish years ago we were going to top slice a percentage of those profits, which had been tithed back, if you like, to the social housing companies. And they would be help set up a community foundation, the Bernicia Foundation, that's given out grants. We've gone way over £1 million now. We've given out grants to smaller organisations and individuals, sometimes just a young person, where £1,000 is a game changer to buy some sports equipment or something like that. So I'm very proud of what we've achieved. We're much more than a housing association. My chief executive refers to quite often with a fourth emergency service. And we're much more than housing. It's about routes to work. It's about life skills, about employment, apprenticeships, all sorts of things, really. And it's been tough, coming not least through Brexit, but also through energy crisis. And some people really struggle, and it is literally food or fuel. And it's tough out there. And we try and work with people in terms of home building and, being custodians, really. But also just our staff work incredibly hard, just in terms of that community shaping and working very much on the ground, really, very much bottom up.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a theme around this holistic approach that seems to be important to you all the way through. So, not looking at things as this is a regeneration project, we're going to take this bit of land and we're going to build X. This is a housing association, so we're going to provide housing. The approach seems to be from you. The things that are important to you is not to look at those things in isolation, to look at that. But that's can be quite overwhelming. You think, crikey, I'm not just building houses here. I'm solving some societal problems. How do you? That's quite a lot to carry. How do you deal with that?
I don't individually. We have a fantastic team. We have a very multi-skilled team, and they have specialisms in all sorts of areas, not just in housing, in social care, in health, in employment. It goes on and on, really. I continue to be so impressed, by how multi-talented they are. And also I think that comes in our board. We're just, we've said goodbye to 3 board members this week through natural churn, and we've welcomed 4 new board members. And we spend a lot of time in sort of being very selective and looking at skills and tapping into people's areas of expertise, really. And that's across the board, really. We're very fortunate. We had a lot of people applying for 4 positions, really. So they can be from housing backgrounds, they can be from employment, from HR, from the legal profession, all sorts of different areas. And that makes up a good board. We've significantly changed the gender balance in the organisation across not just the board, but across the organisation. We've made massive strides on gender pay gap. We've done all sorts of changes within the organisation. It's almost unrecognisable to what it was 5 or 6 years ago. We've blended 4 organisations together. We've refinanced. We've done all the sort of very business appropriate measures to make us a very robust organisation, financially very robust. Thankfully, we're highly regarded by the regulator, and we continue to be looked at as a model of how a social housing company can work and function, and not just in isolation, how we can mentor other organisations as well. Again, John Johnson, the Chief Executive of Bernicia, does an outstanding job in sharing his skills and looking after and offering advice to other organisations as well, really. He's the Deputy Chair of the North East Housing Partnership, and they do a huge amount of work, again, to do that upskilling, really, of the profession. It seems to be that the previous government said that, we need to professionalise the organisation. Now, for us, the profession's always been professionalised.
Yeah.
It's quite patronising, that approach, really. And that won't solve the problems of Grenville. It won't solve the problem, the awful tragedy that we saw over in Rochdale, and it's now become Awab's Law. That won't solve that. It's about how those people are empowered to do their job. Not just having a professional qualification.
Yeah.
It's much more than
Absolutely.
just a gong, really.
I always find that thing around, what is professionalising something. I always find that quite an interesting thing about what people actually mean by that.
Yeah.
They say we need to professionalise this workplace, and what they mean is that people all need to wear suits, or well, that's not going to make. It's the impact side of it as well. What's going to make the impact? And I think what I've always been impressed with Bernicia is, and what John's done is create an inclusive leadership model, and he has actively looked and with your support for diverse voices, to give that diversity of thought, to make sure that the decisions you make take into account the people that you are serving. And I think that's what brings the real strength. That's the professionalism, is having the guts to do that, to say, no, we're going to change what we've got, we're going to create something that's going to be more fit for purpose. To me, that's what professionalism is. It's not who's got what qualification or who's wearing what. But I think, social housing is just one part of what you do. You're also involved with tourism, and tell me a bit about that.
I think it's just through different forums that I enjoy being involved with, not least the Chamber of Commerce, where we are a very active member through Bernicia. But I've known the organisation for sort of many, many years, and I just want to help in any way that I can in terms of promoting the region, helping the region. And as I say, when I was at One North East, we worked on the Passionate People campaign and setting up the regional tourism board and area tourism partnership, the whole infrastructure, and again, upskilling the tourism profession. And I suppose that's carried on, I spent some years at Durham Cathedral. I was head of property at Durham Cathedral. What a fantastic, world-class opportunity that is, really, to continue to sort of celebrate what an amazing city it is, what a fantastic county it is. Obviously Durham is not least in my DNA, really. And again, just sort of promoting in what a fantastic region it really is. So that's carried on. I like to think I contribute to organisations like the Durham Business Group, Visit County Durham, other things. We've got a great opportunity within the region for the tourism organisations to work together. It's being set up as an exemplar, as a pilot of good practice in tourism. And it's just about that collaboration and getting organisations to function well together and come up with a strong message to stop people. I don't think it happens quite as much now, of being on the train from London to Edinburgh and not getting off, anywhere in between, really. There's just one more thing. Some great stuff happening in Sunderland. The whole infrastructure. Again, the old, what was called the Vaux site, was one of my schemes when we were master planning. The closure of the Vaux site. Fantastic and so rewarding to see it all being developed and built out now. And the organic growth, what's happening to the arts and cultural side in the city of Sunderland. So it's not, Newcastle and Gateshead are great, but again, it's linking that with what's happening, in the Durham and the wider Durham area, what's happening in Sunderland, in rural Northumberland, some great schemes going on. Putting all that together, that's a message which I think is second to none anywhere in the country. But again, the stories that come out, again, I'm a great fan of Dan Jackson's book, the Northumbrians, and it tells the whole story from Roman times, right up to modern day, of the story of the Northeast, really. It's a brilliant story, really. Again, going back to what I said earlier about the great inventors, the great innovators, come from the Northeast, how they've been, national and international champions. Really. So it goes on and on, really. The story of the Northeast, I think, is second to none.
And it's got an exciting future. It's got a next
Absolutely.
chapter coming, which is just as exciting.
And I think that's where, you know, you look at the Helix site on the old Scottish Newcastle site in Newcastle. Fantastic innovation that's going on there, and companies spinning out all the time from the universities. You know, Newcastle and Northumbria now. Northumbria again, Newcastle Poly in my day. It's unrecognisable. The campus is superb now. And, you know, they've got some great innovation in space technology happening there. The general site, the Institute of Aging, you know, to try and crack the very, you know, sad effects of dementia and Alzheimer's, really. Fantastic investment there. So it goes on and on, really. I think I'm genuinely really excited. And hopefully that will excite young people in terms of all sorts of areas. Robotics, engineering, you know, it goes on and on. AI, don't pretend to understand too much about AI, but I think the whole concept of that hopefully will be so attractive to young people.
I'm going to pick you on something that you said earlier, which is around being the property manager for Durham Cathedral. I mean, what does that involve? Is that sending people up the spire to put the tiles back on?
Yeah, part of that. I mean, we had an in-house, very skilled team of stonemasons, of joiners who looked after the fabric of the cathedral itself.
Must be very specialist, that, you know,
incredibly,
stonemason,
incredibly specialist, and quite often you had second, third generation stonemasons. It was very much in their family. Incredibly talented bunch of people. I think when I went there, it needed modernising as an organisation. I think it needed some governance and some refreshing in all sorts of areas, which was interesting. It was challenging. But what I was asked to do is to look after not just the cathedral itself and the immediate estate, the college, a number of buildings there, but they also owned a number of properties in the Durham area, but also national investment properties as well in Chatham and Leicester and all sorts of places, bought as investments. And then they had 2,500 acres of land, which was predominantly farmland, that went from South Tyneside down to Teesside. So I was looking after those, you know, farm tenancies, but also we got 2 or 3 what turned out to be very profitable planning applications, planning approvals, you know, for retail and for residential. So again, that was being responsible, and that money, the capital receipts, were being churned back in to looking after the estate itself, and a very cash-hungry building in the middle of Durham, which, you know, needs a huge amount of investment just to keep the lights on. But at the same time, we were trying to look to the future, and I was project director of the Open Treasure project. And that was a £12 million capital investment to tell the whole story, you know, about Cuthbert, and put the Cuthbert treasures all under one roof there. And they're now in what was the Great Kitchen. And that's a great story, you know, and that increases visitor numbers. And trying to get people to say, this is a fantastic asset, but it's a very expensive building to maintain, and just getting them in an appropriate way without charging an admission fee to contribute a little bit more. And we used to come up with, you know, could you afford the price of a cup of coffee for the upkeep of the cathedral? And people by and large did, and you can pay on a tap phone and things now, really. So it was a fascinating role. I
mean, for you, it's sort of a really good blend, isn't it, between the sort of the property, the society bit, and also the tourism bit. It was fascinating.
It was one of the first meetings when I was at One North East. I went to see the Dean and said we were wanting to promote tourism, and it was almost, well, what's tourism got to do with us? And it was to demonstrate, you know, their footfall could play an absolutely key role to the success of the city. Absolutely, everyone's heard of it. And,
Bill Bryson, I think.
Bill Bryson, absolutely, great ambassador. And Fiona Hill now as well, actually, really. She's a fantastic chancellor. And what a story that was.
And she's an incredible woman, and lots of, and a great ambassador for the region.
Absolutely,
you know, internationally known, isn't she? All of these things that you do, you know, you're clearly somebody who doesn't sit still, and does gets involved everywhere, as well as, you know, you're on LinkedIn, you're supporting people who are doing great things there. You're always like very positive, like you say. What outside of all of that, what do you do to relax? You mentioned cycling.
Yeah, do a lot of cycling. Absolutely love it. I mean, that can be relaxing. Sometimes you'd be working hard, but it can be relaxing. Absolutely love that, and starting to focus on quite a big fundraising, hopefully, push next year to support Alzheimer's research. I'll be doing a big sponsored ride next year for that. I just absolutely love it. I think we've got a wealth of treasures in terms of cycling here. I've done some cycling in Romania for a charity there. That was a great experience, and been out to Mallorca a couple of times. We've got some, great coast-to-coast routes, really. So it goes on and on, really, whether that's just going, out for a quick hour spin or something, really. But I just want to keep it going as long as I can, really, Outside of that as well, I mean, my wife runs a fantastic charity where she reaches out to all sorts of disadvantaged people, whether that's asylum seekers, refugees, carers, and I do a little bit of volunteering for that. I drive the minibus.
What's that charity called?
It's actually based at Minstrakers. I mean, she runs the outreach team, and it's very much about reaching out and bringing in, and she puts together care packages for people coming in from all over the northeast, but including a great group from North London that we go and bring up every year as well. And it's like a little oasis of care. She works incredibly hard. She's done it for 10 years. And that was a career change for her as well, really. And she does an amazing job. She's got a great team of volunteers. But she, again, just tries to empathise with people, a very international, obviously, audience. So she puts together a great care package for them. The group just been in this week. And they've had just a couple of days where they've worked in the garden, they worked in the grounds a little bit, really, had a bit of chill time, had a bit of massage, and just been looked after, really. And I'm very proud of what she's achieved there. Yeah.
Well, again, it's that making a difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the sliding door moment that you had when you had an opportunity that came out of the blue, you will be doing that, and your wife will be doing that for somebody else. There will be that moment that changes that person's future for the good.
Yeah, hopefully.
And that's brilliant. So keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And thanks for being such a brilliant ambassador for the region and for the people of the region.
Thanks, Jill.
Thanks for joining me.
Really
today.
appreciate it. Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed that episode of our podcast, Fear Less Do More. If you did, then please follow or subscribe. If you enjoyed what we talked about in this episode, then you might enjoy this one here, which is also linked in the show notes. Thanks for listening.